Silence is not empty. It breathes. It waits. And when it finally closes its mouth around someone, it does not scream. It does not beg. It simply keeps them, the way the earth keeps a body long after the soul has fled. In the villages that clung to the edges of medieval Europe, people believed silence was holy. They believed God lived inside it. They believed anything loud was sinful, anything defiant was dangerous, and anything that refused to bow deserved to be erased. Not killed, erased. Because death ended suffering, but erasure made suffering eternal. She did not know this yet. She only knew the smell of wet stone after rain, the way candle smoke curled like a living thing, and the sound of bells that marked time whether you were ready for it or not. Her name was Elsbeth, and until the day the world turned against her, she had lived quietly enough to be invisible. Invisible people feel safe. They believe safety is permanent. They believe obedience is armor. They believe if they lower their eyes and soften their voice, the world will pass them by like a storm that never makes landfall. Elsbeth believed all of that. She was wrong. Her village rested beneath the shadow of a monastery whose walls were older than memory. The stones were darkened by centuries of prayer and confession, by whispered sins and public punishments, by hands that trembled and hands that struck. People said the walls absorbed sound, that nothing spoken inside ever truly escaped. Elsbeth had never entered its court chambers, but she had passed its gates enough times to feel their weight in her chest. She was not remarkable. That was her first crime. She carried water from the well. She mended torn cloth. She sang only when she was alone. Her beauty, if it existed, was quiet. Her faith, if it existed, was cautious. She knew how to survive by not being seen. But invisibility is fragile. It breaks the moment someone decides to look. It began with a glance held too long, a pause in conversation when she entered a room, a prayer that ended a little too sharply when she passed. Suspicion does not announce itself. It grows like mold, slow and unnoticed, until it owns the walls. The monastery had lost its certainty. Crops had failed twice in 3 years. A child had been born lifeless. A fire had taken a farmer's home. These were not disasters to them. These were messages. God was displeased, and displeasure demanded a reason. People do not ask why tragedy happens. They ask who caused it. When fear needs a body, it chooses the one least protected. Elsbeth first heard her name spoken differently in the market. Not as a greeting, not as recognition, but as a question. The word lingered in the air as if it were unfinished, dangerous to complete. Elsbeth. She felt it before she understood it. That thin chill behind the ribs. That sense of being measured, weighed, judged without a scale. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself people were restless. She told herself faith sometimes sounded like anger. She told herself everything had an explanation that did not include her. That was her second crime. Belief. The monks spoke of discipline, of correction, of mercy that looked like punishment and punishment that called itself love. Their sermons softened cruelty with scripture. They reminded the villagers that God did not need kindness to be just, that justice was often quiet, final, clean. Elsbeth listened like everyone else. She lowered her head. She folded her hands. She felt the words pass over her like cold rain. One evening, a woman she barely knew crossed herself when Elsbeth passed. Another refused to meet her eyes. A child asked if she was dangerous. Dangerous. The word sat inside her like a stone. She went to sleep that night with the sound of bells echoing in her skull. Not ringing. Warning. They came for her at dawn, not with violence, not with shouting. That would have been honest. They came with formality, with permission, with the weight of righteousness behind their steps. 2 monks, 1 village elder, 1 expression that carried no doubt. Elsbeth, they said softly, you must come with us. People watched from behind doors, from corners, from prayers they pretended were not curiosity. No one stopped. Them. No one asked why. Innocence is fragile when silence is law. She followed because she had been taught to follow, because refusal felt heavier than obedience. because fear dressed as respect. The monastery gates opened like a mouth that had been waiting to speak her name. Inside, the air changed, thicker, still, as if sound itself had been disciplined here. Every footstep felt like a confession. They did not touch her, they did not threaten her, they did not need to. The walls had already done the work. She was led past chambers she was not allowed to see into one that smelled of cold stone and old ink. A table, a chair, a crucifix that watched more than it blessed. "You are not accused," one monk said gently. "That was the lie, the kind that sounds like comfort. You are being examined. Examined meant judged. Judged meant chosen." She did not cry. Tears would have meant she believed in mercy, and mercy had already left the room. They spoke of rumors, of improper behavior, of glances, of walking alone too often, of prayers not spoken loudly enough, of a spirit that did not align itself correctly. They never said the word witch. They did not need to. The word was already breathing between them. Elsbeth answered softly, carefully, truthfully. But truth is weak when fear is organized. When they dismissed her, she was not free. She was suspended, like a body waiting for gravity to decide its direction. Outside, the village felt different, smaller, sharper. Watching, she walked home knowing something had begun that did not require her consent. And somewhere within the monastery, silence had already started preparing a place for her. The days that followed did not belong to her anymore. They belonged to waiting, waiting for footsteps that did not come, waiting for a summons that did, waiting for the sound of her name spoken with finality. People no longer greeted her. They acknowledged her existence the way one acknowledges a shadow on a wall, with discomfort and distance. Doors closed a little faster. Conversations shifted when she entered a space. Even the air around her felt cautious, as if it feared being associated with her. Guilt is contagious. Once someone is suspected, everyone becomes careful not to catch it. She continued her tasks because stopping would have been an admission. She carried water. She mended cloth. She kept her eyes lowered. But every movement now felt observed, measured against a standard she could not see and did not understand. At night, she dreamed of walls, endless stone, no doors, no sound, just pressure, just waiting. 3 days later, the bells rang for her, not the bells of prayer, the bells of judgment. They were slower, deeper, meant to be heard. The village gathered as if drawn by instinct. No one had been told to come, yet everyone arrived. Fear does not require an invitation. Elsbeth was taken again through the monastery gates, but this time she was not alone. The eyes of the village followed her, not with Hatter, Ed, not with compassion, with relief. Relief that it was not them. Inside, she was led into a chamber larger than the last. Candles lined the walls like silent witnesses. The crucifix was higher here, looming rather than guiding. She was placed at the center, standing, while others sat. Power does not need to announce itself. It arranges the room and lets the body understand. They asked the same questions in different shapes. Where had she gone alone? Why had she spoken to no one? Why had she been seen near the river at dusk? Why did her prayers lack passion? Her answers were the same. Simple, honest, insufficient. Truth is not what is required in a trial of fear. Submission is. One monk leaned forward, his voice calm, practiced. "Do you believe God corrects those he loves?" "Yes," she said. "Do you believe correction can be painful?" "Yes." "Do you believe pain can cleanse?" She hesitated. That hesitation was recorded. They did not accuse her of evil. They accused her of imbalance, of spiritual misalignment, of a soul that wandered too freely and therefore invited darkness. It sounded gentle, medical, necessary. "You are not condemned," they said. "You are to be protected from yourself." Protection is the most dangerous word a prison can use. She was told she would not return home, that she would be placed somewhere quiet, somewhere she could reflect, pray, repent, heal. She asked how long. They did not answer. She asked where. They did not answer. The absence of answers was the answer. When she was let out, the village did not look at her. Judgment is easier when you do not meet the eyes of what you are destroying. They walked past the outer courtyard into a part of the monastery she had never seen. The stones were older, rougher, unadorned by devotion. This was not a place of worship. This was a place of correction. She smelled dampness, cold earth, still air. A narrow corridor opened into a chamber that was barely a room, stone on all sides. No windows, no light except the torch that trembled in the monk's hand. In one wall was a small opening, just wide enough for a hand to pass through. Food, water, survival, measured and controlled. Her breath caught. "This is not burial," the monk said, anticipating her terror. "This is mercy. You will live. Live." The word sounded unfamiliar. Fragile. Conditional. She looked at the space and understood something that had no language. She was not meant to leave. She was meant to fade. They called it enclosure, seclusion, sacred isolation. History would call it something else. She was guided inside. The stone was colder than winter. The air heavier than fear. Her heartbeat sounded loud, offensive, like a protest. I did not push her. They did not need to. When the wall began to close, she finally understood the difference between execution and erasure. Execution ends a life. Erasure denies it ever mattered. Stone was laid carefully, brick by brick, prayer by prayer, each movement slow, reverent, precise, as if they were building something holy. Her voice rose once, just once, not a scream, a name, her own. It vanished into stone. The opening remained, small, controlled, her last connection to a world that had decided she no longer belonged to it. When they left, the torch went with them. Darkness stayed, and in that darkness, Elsbeth did not feel dead. She felt archived, stored, forgotten while still breathing. Time did not move inside the stone. It pressed, it settled, it wrapped itself around her like another wall. At first, Elsbeth tried to count, heartbeats, breaths, the slow drip of water somewhere beyond the stone. She believed if she could measure time, she could still belong to it. But the dark was not interested in measurement. The dark erased edges. It blurred beginnings and ends until everything felt like the same endless moment. Her hands searched the walls, rough, cold, unforgiving. No cracks large enough to promise escape. No surface warm enough to feel human. The floor was bare stone, the ceiling low enough to remind her that even standing fully upright was a privilege now taken from her. She sat because there was nowhere else to be. At some point, the opening in the wall changed color. A faint square of gray replaced pure black. Food was passed through, bread hard and dry, water in a clay cup that scraped her fingers as she took it. No words, no eye contact. Only the function of survival, delivered without recognition. She whispered thanks anyway. Gratitude had been carved into her bones since childhood. But the stone did not respond. The first night, if night still existed, she did not sleep. Sleep required safety. This place was not meant for rest. It was meant for patience, the kind that breaks people quietly. She pressed her forehead against the wall and tried to pray. The words came out tangled, uncertain. The prayers she had known all her life suddenly felt distant, like borrowed language that no longer fit her mouth. Was this God? Was this mercy? Her breath sounded too loud, like an intrusion, like something that did not belong here. In the monastery above her, bells rang. She could hear them faintly through layers of stone. Life was continuing. Prayers were being spoken. Meals were being shared. Her absence had already been absorbed into routine. That was when she understood. She was not being punished. She was being removed. The days, if they were days, brought hunger that did not end when she ate. Thirst that returned immediately. The bread kept her alive but did not nourish her hope. The water sustained her body but starved her sense of meaning. She began speaking to the walls. At first it was practical, counting aloud, reciting prayers, naming memories so they would not dissolve. Her mother's voice, the smell of rain on dirt, the feeling of warm bread fresh from the oven, proof that a world had once existed where she was allowed to be real. Then it changed. She began asking the walls questions. Why was she chosen? What had she done that obedience had not undone? Was silence truly holy, or simply convenient? The walls did not answer, but they listened. Stone is very good at listening. It keeps everything. Her voice weakened over time, not because she stopped speaking, but because speaking without being heard teaches the throat that sound is pointless. She learned to ration her words. The opening in the wall became her horizon. When it darkened, she knew she was alone again. When it lightened, she prepared herself to be ignored by a living hand. Sometimes the bread came late. Sometimes the water was less. Sometimes it did not come at all until her body shook with desperation. These were not mistakes. These were reminders. You exist because we allow it. You breathe because we have not decided otherwise. One day she pressed her hand through the opening too far, just slightly, desperate for proof that another human body still existed on the other side. A hand struck hers away, not hard, not cruelly, just efficiently. She withdrew as if burned. Pain would have been easier than that gesture. Pain acknowledges a person. That gesture acknowledged an object. She began to understand that this was not a cell. It was a demonstration. A warning to anyone who might one day stand where she had stood and hesitate before obedience. Look what happens when you become visible. Her dreams became crowded. Faces from her village appeared, watching her through the opening. They never spoke. They simply observed as if she were already a memory. She woke, gasping, unsure if she had been dreaming or remembering the future. Her body weakened slowly, the kind of weakening that feels like betrayal. Muscles forgot their purpose, joints stiffened. The cold settled into her bones and refused to leave. Yet she did not die. That was the cruelty. Death would have closed the story. This place existed to keep it open forever. She marked the wall with her fingernails. Small scratches, proof of continuity, proof that she was still present inside the absence. But even the marks began to fade. Stone heals itself. It forgets on purpose. At some point, she stopped marking time and started marking herself, touching her arms, her face, her chest, just to remember shape, just to confirm she had not become part of the wall. Her own voice sounded strange to her now, thin, echoless, as if it no longer expected response. She realized something terrifying. If they opened the wall tomorrow and told her she was free, she would not know how to leave. Freedom requires memory of space. She had been taught only confinement, and that was when the real punishment revealed itself. They were not waiting for her to die. They were waiting for her to forget how to live. Existence is loud when a world is built on silence. At first, Elsbeth feared her anger. She treated it like a spark that could burn her alive if she let it grow. Anger had never been allowed in her body. It had never been taught as prayer, never framed as devotion. But here, inside the stone, anger was the only proof that something human still resisted becoming an object. She did not shout. She did not strike the walls again. That would have been too visible, too desperate. Instead, she let the anger live quietly, the way seeds live under frozen soil, waiting, surviving, refusing disappearance. Her breathing changed, deeper, slower, as if her body was relearning how to occupy space. Even a space this small, even a space this cruel. When the opening brightened and the bread appeared, she did not reach for it immediately. For the first time, she waited. Not long. Just long enough for the hand on the other side to hesitate. Just long enough to remind whoever stood there that something conscious still existed beyond the stone. It was a small rebellion, invisible to history, powerful to her. She ate after. Survival was still necessary. But submission was no longer complete. Her thoughts sharpened. She began remembering things more clearly. Not colors yet, not faces, but feelings. The warmth of sunlight on skin. The relief of rain after drought. the sound of laughter that had once been allowed to exist without guilt. She realized something terrifying and beautiful. They could control her body, they could ration her food, they could limit her air, but they could not control what her mind chose to preserve. Memory was not obedience. One day, faintly, she heard voices beyond the wall, not near the opening, farther away, echoing through stone corridors, new voices, younger voices, life moving forward without her. The monastery continued. The world continued. And yet, in that continuation, she was proof that continuation did not mean justice. She began speaking again, softly, carefully, not prayers, not apologies, stories. She told the walls about who she had been, about the girl who had carried water from the well, about the woman who had believed obedience was protection, about the moment she learned that silence could be a weapon. She narrated her own existence so it would not dissolve. If no one else would record her, she would. Her body weakened further, but her mind grew strangely firm, like something that had accepted collapse and therefore no longer feared it. Fear requires the belief that safety is possible. She no longer believed that. She believed in truth instead. And truth had already been revealed. Time took more from her. Strength, vision, precision of movement. But it could not take her awareness. Then, one day the opening did not brighten. She waited and waited. No light, no bread, no water. This was different from delay. This was finality. She pressed her face to the stone, not in panic, but in understanding. Her body was tired. It had been tired for a long time, the kind of tired that does not ask for rescue. So this was how it ended. Not with witnesses, not with justice, but with quiet removal. She did not beg. She did not pray for release. She spoke her name one last time, not loudly, not desperately, just clearly. Elsbeth. The sound was thin, but it was complete. She lay back against the stone. The cold no longer startled her. It felt honest. Stone had never pretended to be kind. People had. Her breath slowed. Her thoughts softened. But they did not vanish. Her final understanding was simple. They had buried her to make an example. But examples only work if they are remembered. And silence does not erase truth. It only hides it. When her breathing stopped, the stone did not change. The monastery did not pause. The world did not acknowledge the loss of a life it had already decided was unnecessary. She became absence officially. Years passed. Decades. Generations. The monastery aged. Walls cracked. Repairs were made. Stories shifted. Records were lost. Names were rewritten. Her cell became storage, then foundation, then forgotten space. But the stone remembered. Stone always remembers. Sometimes, during renovations, workers spoke of cold places where the air felt heavy, where sound behaved strangely, where people grew quiet without knowing why. They never found her. They never looked for her. The purpose had already been fulfilled. Fear had been taught. Obedience had been preserved. And yet, her existence had not been erased, because you are hearing her now, not her voice, not her bones, but the truth of what was done in the name of holiness. They called it mercy, they called it correction, they called it protection. It was none of those things. It was burial without death, execution without blood, silence without innocence. This was not about one woman. This was about a system that learned how to destroy without appearing violent, how to disappear people without calling it murder, how to keep its hands clean while its walls stayed full. Elsbeth did not die forgotten. She died archived, stored inside stone, stored inside fear, stored inside the obedience of those who survived her. And now she exists again, not as a body, but as memory. And memory is the one thing silence has never been able to bury.